The year was 2385, and humanity had reached a point where its influence spread across the stars. The United Earth Federation, UEF, had established itself as the dominant power in the galaxy, with its advanced technology and formidable military forces ensuring its place at the top of the intergalactic hierarchy. Earth had become the center of a sprawling empire that encompassed numerous worlds, colonies, and species. But despite the vastness of the universe and all its complexities, humanity had yet to truly understand the full scope of the cosmos. There were hundreds of species, some friendly, some neutral, and some outright hostile. Diplomatic ties had been formed with many, while others remained a mystery. One such species was the Valtori, an enigmatic alien race that had been quiet for centuries. A once great galactic power, the Valtori had vanished from the known galactic map years ago, without explanation. No one knew whether they had simply faded into obscurity, were wiped out, or had chosen to remain hidden. But their disappearance had left many questions unanswered. And then, suddenly, the call came. It started with a faint signal, almost a whisper, reaching the UEF's communications network. It was a garbled transmission, difficult to decipher, but the message was unmistakable. "We are in distress. We need your help," it pleaded, its source originating from deep within the Edge Nebula, a dark, dangerous region of space, so far from the core that even seasoned explorers dared not venture too close. Commander Lydia Ashford, the leader of the UEF flagship Indelible, had heard of the Valtori only in passing. Stories of their power and technological marvels had passed through various diplomatic channels, but there had been no communication with them in over a century. The transmission, however, could not be ignored. The signal was clear and urgent, and it sent shockwaves through the UEF. Whoever or whatever was responsible for this message must have been in dire need of assistance. "Get me the council," Lydia ordered as soon as the message was intercepted. "We're leaving in an hour. Prepare the fleet." The council meeting was an uncharacteristically hurried affair. Despite the secrecy and distance surrounding the Valtori, it was clear that the situation required immediate attention. As the meeting progressed, discussions ranged from the diplomatic implications to the tactical considerations of venturing so far into uncharted space. But one thing was clear. They would send a fleet, and Commander Ashford would lead it. The UEF's finest ships and crews would make the journey to the unknown coordinates, and the Valtori would receive their help, whether they wanted it or not. The Indelible was the UEF's pride, an experimental warship laden with the latest technology and weapon systems. Its sleek, intimidating design was a testament to humanity's power, and Lydia was its commanding officer. Her crew was hand-picked for this mission, the best the Federation had to offer. They would travel into the heart of the Edge Nebula and beyond to whatever awaited them. Her second-in-command, Captain Darren Cormac, sat across from her in the ship's command room as they went over their strategy. Cormac, a seasoned officer with a calm demeanor and sharp intellect, had been with Lydia since her earliest missions, and he had become a trusted ally. His brow furrowed as he examined the scans of the transmission. "This region of space is incredibly unstable," Cormac said, tapping the display in front of him. "There's a lot of electromagnetic interference from the nebula. The Valtori signal could have been distorted, or it could be a trap. We can't afford to make any mistakes." Lydia nodded. "I know, but the signal was too strong, too desperate to ignore. If the Valtori are in danger, it's up to us to answer the call. We've dealt with hostile forces before. If we encounter them again, we'll fight back. But we'll also keep our eyes open. We can't let our guard down." As the fleet prepared for departure, Lydia sat quietly on the bridge, staring out into the endless black of space. Her thoughts were heavy. The fate of the Valtori hung in the balance, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this mission than a simple call for help. It felt off. Too many unanswered questions. But she pushed the doubts aside. Her duty was to the mission, and that was all that mattered. The journey to the Edge Nebula took several weeks, each day passing in a blur of hyperspace jumps, briefings, and constant monitoring of the fleet systems. The Indomitable sailed through the stars, its engines humming steadily as it sliced through the darkness. Alongside it, a dozen other ships followed, each one equipped for different purposes. The fleet was a symbol of the UEF's power. Warships, cargo vessels, and support ships all gathered together in preparation for whatever might lie ahead. As they neared the edge of the nebula, the ship's sensors began to flicker, and the once calm hum of the engines grew erratic. The gravitational anomalies of the nebula were playing havoc with their navigation systems. "Shields up," Lydia ordered, standing from her seat. "Get us through it." The crew scrambled into action as the ship's powerful shields flared into life, surrounding the Indomitable in a protective aura. The turbulence grew more intense, and for a moment it seemed as though the ship might be ripped apart by the violent currents of energy within the nebula. But Lydia kept her focus. She had commanded ships through worse. "We're almost there," Cormac said, preparing for entry into the Valtori system now. As the fleet emerged from the nebula, the sight that greeted them was nothing short of terrifying. The once thriving Valtori homeworld, a lush, vibrant planet of vast oceans and towering cities, was now a shadow of its former self. The sky above was filled with black smoke, and the once glittering cities were nothing more than charred ruins. Pieces of debris, both large and small, floated aimlessly in the atmosphere, as if the planet itself was mourning its own destruction. "Is this the Valtori homeworld?" Lydia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It is," Cormac said grimly, scanning the planet's surface. "But it doesn't look like any battle we've ever fought. Something much worse is happening here." Just as Lydia was about to give the order to launch a reconnaissance team, Lieutenant Renna, the communications officer, interrupted. "Commander, we've received another signal," she reported, her fingers flying over the console. "It's not from the Valtori. It's from another fleet." Lydia's heart skipped a beat. "Another fleet? What do we know about them?" The image on the screen flickered for a moment before stabilizing. It was an enormous fleet. Ships of a design unlike anything the UEF had ever encountered. Sleek, dark, and angular, they appeared to be moving toward the planet with purpose, their weapons primed and ready. "They're heading straight for the Valtori homeworld," Rena said, her voice filled with awe. "But who are they?" Lydia's hand tightened around the armrest of her chair as she studied the ships. There was no time to waste. She immediately ordered the fleet to prepare for engagement. The Valtori were under attack, and she had no idea who these invaders were, but they were about to find out just how much firepower the UEF could bring. As the fleet moved into position, the situation suddenly grew more dire. The alien ships accelerated toward the Valtori planet, and the enemy was closing in fast. The UEF fleet's advanced sensors could pick up every detail of the incoming ships. Their hulls were dark and metallic, their designs sharp and deadly. These were no ordinary invaders. Whoever they were more than just another enemy to deal with. Just as Lydia was preparing to make her next move, an unexpected signal rang through the comms system. "We're the Deathworlders, stand by." The words sent a shiver down Lydia's spine. The Deathworlders were a name whispered in hushed tones throughout the galaxy. Little was known about them, save for legends and rumors. Stories of a race of warriors that had fought and conquered more hostile worlds than any other species in the universe. They were considered myth by most. But now, they had just announced their arrival. Lydia could hardly believe it. "Deathworlders?" she whispered to herself, almost incredulously. And then, from the depths of space, they appeared. The Deathworlder fleet emerged out of nowhere, massive ships of unearthly design cutting through the blackness of space. Their ships were massive, some larger than the Indomitable itself, and their weapon systems appeared to be far more advanced than anything the UEF had ever seen. Their fleet, though unfamiliar, had an undeniable aura of raw power and terrifying purpose. The Deathworlder ships moved toward the invading fleet, and without hesitation the battle began. Their weapons fired, and the enemy fleet, once so confident in their overwhelming strength, was ripped apart. Plasma torpedoes tore through enemy hulls, and laser beams of unimaginable power shredded through the alien ships. Within moments, the invaders' fleet began to break apart in panic, their vessels scattering in every direction as they attempted to flee. Lydia watched in awe as the Deathworlders tore through the enemy ranks with ruthless precision. The sheer force of their firepower was enough to make the UEF's own weapons systems look like toys. They were unstoppable. The Valtori, though devastated, now had hope. And then, through the chaos, a small, cloaked Deathworlder ship approached the Indomitable. It was sleek and silent, its dark silhouette cutting through the debris field. On the comm screen, a single figure appeared. It was humanoid but unlike any species Lydia had ever seen. The figure was enormous, armored in jagged black plating, with glowing eyes that seemed to burn with intensity. "Commander Ashford," the figure's voice boomed, a low growl that reverberated through the ship. You are fortunate. We heard the distress call. Your enemies are not the first to try and take the Valtori, and they won't be the last." Lydia's heart raced. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Why did you come?" The figure's eyes glowed brighter, and a faint smirk curled across its face. "We are the Deathworlders, and we never leave a friend behind." The Deathworlder fleet's arrival had shattered everything Lydia Ashford knew about warfare. The UEF, with its advanced military, had never seen anything like it before. While the United Earth Federation's ships were formidable, the Deathworlder fleet was in a league of its own. The power, precision, and sheer force with which they engaged the enemy was breathtaking. Lydia had watched as their weapons tore apart the alien invader fleet in mere moments, turning a battle that should have been disastrous for the Valtori into a victory. Yet, even as the enemy ships fled into the dark corners of the galaxy, Lydia's mind couldn't quite shake the unease that had settled within her. On the bridge of the Indomitable, she remained frozen, staring at the Deathworlder figure on the view screen. The colossal humanoid figure, clothed in jagged black armor, stood still in front of them. His eyes burned with a molten intensity, and his voice echoed across the command deck, carrying with it an authority that Lydia knew could not be questioned. "We are the Deathworlders," the figure repeated, his tone commanding and unwavering, "and we do not leave a friend behind." The words echoed in Lydia's mind. A friend. She had never heard of the Deathworlders before the transmission. The rumors were all that existed. Stories of warriors who existed in the shadows, a race whose sheer brutality made even the most hardened soldiers shudder. Their origins were shrouded in myth, and their motives even more elusive. Some believed they were an ancient race of conquerors. Others speculated that they were protectors of the galaxy's most dangerous and hostile planets. But the truth had always been elusive. Until now. "Who are you?" Lydia found herself asking, unable to hide the curiosity in her voice. The leader of the Deathworlders stared at her, his glowing eyes softening for a brief moment, before speaking again. "You have heard of us, I am sure," he said, "but we are not a race of heroes, nor are we merely mercenaries. We are survivalists. Our worlds are among the most dangerous, the most hostile places in the galaxy. For eons we have fought and bled to survive, to conquer. In our darkest days we learned that only the strongest will endure. The weak perish. It is the law of our kind." Lydia felt a chill run through her, the weight of the figure's words settling over her like a shroud. His presence was almost oppressive, a stark reminder of just how much they were at the mercy of a force far beyond their control. "I don't understand," Lydia said, trying to make sense of it all. "What do you want with the Valtori? Why help us?" The Deathworlder seemed to consider the question for a moment, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the crew on the bridge. "The Valtori were not the first to be attacked," he said, his voice steady, "nor will they be the last. We do not act out of altruism, Commander. The balance of power in the galaxy has been disturbed. Your Federation, your species, has made many enemies, but your greatest threat is yet to come. The invaders you face today are but a part of a larger force. Lydia felt a jolt in her chest. Larger force? Who are they? The Deathworlder did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, as if considering whether he should divulge such knowledge to an outsider. But then his gaze shifted back to Lydia. The beings who attacked the Valtori are part of an ancient alliance, one older than your Federation. We call them the Arcleans. They are relentless, tireless conquerors, driven by a desire to spread their dominion across the stars. For centuries, they have scoured the galaxy, wiping out civilizations, conquering worlds, and bending them to their will. The Valtori were just one of their targets, but now that you've entered the picture, they will not stop until they have your world as well. Lydia's mind raced. The Arcleans. The name sent a cold shiver down her spine. She had never heard of them, and yet, according to this Deathworlder, they had been lurking in the background, waiting for the right moment to strike. "But why help us?" she asked, her voice betraying a flicker of doubt. "You've destroyed their fleet, but why not leave us to fight our own battles? You could have just as easily wiped them out without interference." The Deathworlder's gaze remained unwavering. "Because you have something we need. The Arcleans may have powerful armies and vast fleets, but they are not invincible. They do not understand what it means to fight on Deathworlds, to survive when every step could be your last. You are not ready for them, not yet, but you will be. And when you are, we will be there. We will stand with you for as long as it takes." Lydia shook her head, trying to process the enormity of the situation. "And if we don't fight back, what happens then?" The Deathworlder's eyes darkened, and a low growl rumbled from deep within his chest. "Then your Federation will fall, just like all the others. The Arcleans will burn your cities, wipe your colonies from the stars, and enslave your people. It will be a fate worse than death. And we will not be there to stop it." Lydia took a deep breath, her mind now fully alert. This was not a time for hesitation. The fate of humanity and the Valtori now hung in the balance. She had been called to this mission to provide aid to the Valtori, and now she found herself thrust into a much larger, far more dangerous game. "We're not ready for a war against the Arcleans," Lydia said, more to herself than to the Deathworlder. "We don't even know where to start." "You have the resources," the Deathworlder replied. "Your Federation is powerful, but it is not enough. We will train your soldiers, help you develop new tactics, and arm your fleets with the weapons you will need. We are not your enemies, Commander. But if you do not act now, the consequences will be dire. The Arcleans are coming." Lydia's thoughts swirled with 1,000 questions, but she forced herself to focus. The Valtori were not the only ones in danger. The Federation itself was on the precipice of an unimaginable conflict. If the Arcleans were as dangerous as this Deathworlder claimed, then every preparation, every move, every choice would need to be carefully considered. The next few weeks would define the future of the entire galaxy. "What's your name?" Lydia asked, needing to ground herself in the reality of the moment. She wasn't sure why she asked. Maybe she just needed to humanize the entity in front of her, but the Deathworlder's response was not what she expected. "Gerardalal told me." "They call me Karak," he said. "And you, Commander Ashford, will come to understand that we do not fight for glory. We fight for survival. In this galaxy there is no room for weakness. Only strength will determine the victor." Lydia nodded, her expression resolute. She was no stranger to the harsh realities of warfare, but this was something entirely different. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and the choices ahead were anything but simple. "All right, Karak," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I understand. We'll prepare for what's to come. But I need more. I need to know everything about these Arcleans. If we're going to stand a chance, we have to know our enemy." Karak's glowing eyes flickered in approval. "Very well. I will share what I know. But be prepared, Commander. The Arcleans will not show mercy. And if you wish to survive, you must be ready to do what others would consider unthinkable." Lydia took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. This war would not be easy. She could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders, the future of countless worlds depending on her decisions. And yet she knew one thing with certainty. Humanity would not back down. They never had, and they never would. The Arcleans would learn that the hard way. "We will fight," Lydia said, her voice unwavering. "And we'll win." Karak's eyes gleamed. "Then let us begin." The next few weeks aboard the Indomitable were a blur of activity. Lydia Ashford hardly had time to breathe as she oversaw the preparations for the coming conflict. The Deathworlders, under the leadership of Karak, had made their presence known and their intentions clear. They weren't here to simply fight the Arcleans for the Federation. They had their own stake in this war, one born of necessity. They had survived for eons by being the strongest, the deadliest, and the most ruthless species in the galaxy. They fought not for glory, but for survival. Lydia knew that this new alliance, however uneasy it felt, was the Federation's only hope. The Arcleans were an unknown, but the stories Karak shared painted a picture of an unstoppable force. An ancient race with unimaginable power and a hunger to spread across the stars. They had been responsible for the downfall of many civilizations before, and their ultimate goal was to make the galaxy their own. The Federation, though powerful, had never faced an enemy like the Arcleans. The Valtori, it seemed, were only one of many victims in a long history of destruction. To Lydia's surprise, Karak and the Deathworlders weren't the only ones offering assistance. The Valtori, although devastated and broken, had not given up. The few surviving leaders of the Valtori people had rallied together and formed a desperate council. Their planet was in ruins, but their knowledge of the Arcleans, however limited, was invaluable. As it turned out, the Valtori had fought the Arcleans before, long ago. The scars from that conflict were still fresh, and they knew firsthand the devastation the Arcleans could bring. Commander Ashford sat in the war room of the Indomitable, her eyes scanning the holomap of the galaxy. The room was dimly lit with soft blue lights casting shadows against the walls. The rest of her senior officers sat around the table, and the Valtori representatives were seated at the far side. Karak stood behind Lydia, his imposing figure silent, yet ever present. The room was tense. "We've reviewed the intelligence," Captain Darren Cormack said, his voice breaking the silence. "The Arcleans are not just coming, they've already begun their assault. They've hit 2 major Federation colonies, Aurelia 4 and Gorthon 6. Both have been completely destroyed. No survivors. The sheer scale of their attack is unlike anything we've seen before." Lydia nodded grimly. "How many fleets are they fielding?" "Unknown. But their ships are advanced, way beyond anything we've encountered. Their energy weapons are powerful, and their tactical superiority is clear. They can jump in and out of combat with ease. They've mastered both long-range bombardment and close-quarters combat." "I've seen their technology before," Karak interjected, his voice low and rough. "The Arcleans are a relentless force. Their warships are designed to overwhelm and crush. They don't fight to win, they fight to break you. They'll use any advantage they can get." Lydia turned to the Valtori representatives who had been listening intently. One of them, an older, dignified Valtori woman named Jalkra, spoke up. "We know them," Jalkra said, her voice tinged with both sorrow and anger. "We fought the Arcleans in a war over a century ago. They wiped out our fleets, burned our cities, and destroyed our colonies. We barely survived. But we remember their tactics. They do not care for conventional warfare. They strike where it hurts the most, disrupt your supply lines, and destroy any hope of resistance." Lydia felt the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her. The Federation's fleets were formidable, but they were not ready for an enemy this ruthless. The Valtori's insights were invaluable, but Lydia knew that the Federation would have to adapt quickly. She couldn't rely solely on old tactics, especially when the stakes were so high. "What do you recommend?" Lydia asked, turning to the Valtori council members. Jokra's eyes hardened. You need to hit them hard, Commander. Do not give them room to breathe. Use guerrilla tactics, sabotage, anything you can to slow their advance. But above all, you must disrupt their supply chains. If you can't stop them at their source, you will never defeat them. Lydia considered the advice. Disrupt their supply lines? How? We've already begun sending out covert teams to infiltrate Arclean outposts, Jalkra said. They are slow to react in unfamiliar territory. If you can get close enough to their logistics hubs, you can cause damage, cripple their fleets. Lydia made a decision. We'll need a strike force. Cormac, get a team together. We'll strike at their supply chains. A few of the officers exchanged uneasy glances. Disrupting Arclean logistics was no small task, especially when their fleets were so advanced. But Lydia was resolute. It was their best chance. We're not ready for a full-scale battle, Lydia said, standing from the table. But we can make small, meaningful hits. If we can make them bleed, if we can disrupt their momentum, we might just stand a chance. Karak stepped forward then, his voice as calm and ominous as ever. And that is where we come in. We will train your soldiers, show them how to fight like we do. The Deathworlders are the last of our kind, but we are experts in survival. You need more than just firepower to win this war. You need to become Deathworlders yourselves. Lydia's gaze hardened. I've seen what your people can do, Karak. If we're going to fight like you, we need to know everything, every strategy, every tactic. We can't afford mistakes. Karak's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through her, measuring her resolve. You will learn. But the training will not be easy. It will push your people to their limits. Only those who survive will be ready for what's to come. Lydia's mind raced. The training would be grueling, and she had no illusions about the cost. The Deathworlders didn't hold back, and they didn't care if they pushed their trainees beyond their breaking points, but the stakes were too high. If they were to defeat the Arcleans, they would need every advantage they could get. The next day, the training began. The Indomitable was converted into a makeshift training ground. Holographic simulations were set up across the ship's hangar bays, and specialized combat programs were tailored to the rigorous techniques of the Deathworlders. The training was harsh, unrelenting. Soldiers were taught how to fight in zero-gravity environments, how to endure extreme physical stress, how to survive with minimal supplies, and how to engage in brutal, up-close combat. Lydia watched as her crew struggled, then adapted. It was unlike any training she had ever seen. The soldiers were pushed to their limits, their bodies racked with exhaustion, but each day they grew stronger, their minds sharpened. Their tactics evolved, and their will to survive strengthened. At first, the soldiers grumbled under the weight of the training, but Karak's brutal methods soon earned their respect. The Deathworlders were not kind instructors, but they were effective. They demanded perfection, but offered no sympathy when it wasn't achieved. The lesson was simple. Weakness would be punished, and strength would be rewarded. After weeks of grueling training, Lydia saw a marked change in her crew. They were no longer the same soldiers who had boarded the Indomitable weeks before. They were stronger, faster, and more disciplined. They had become warriors, hardened by the brutal lessons of the Deathworlders. But as the soldiers prepared for their first strike against the Arclean supply chain, Lydia could feel the weight of the upcoming battle pressing down on her. The time for training was over. They were ready, or as ready as they would ever be. The fleet set off toward their target, an Arclean logistics hub located in a remote system deep within Arclean-controlled space. The hub was a critical point in the enemy's operations. If they could strike it, they would cripple the Arclean war machine. But Lydia knew the risks. The Arcleans would not take kindly to such an intrusion, and retaliation would be swift and brutal. As they neared the target, Lydia stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, staring at the vastness of space before her. The countdown had begun, and her heart raced with anticipation. She turned to Cormac, who was sitting at the helm. "We're going to hit them hard, Cormac," she said, her voice steady. "We can't let them see us coming." "Understood, Commander," Cormac replied. "The team's ready. We'll hit them with everything we've got." The Indomitable and the other ships in the fleet made their way into Arclean space, their approach as stealthy as possible. The time for words was over. The time for action had arrived. And the Federation would show the Arcleans that they would not stand idly by while their empire crumbled. It was time for war. The silence that hung over the command bridge of the Indomitable was unbearable as they approached the Arclean logistics hub. Lydia Ashford stood rigid at the command table, her eyes fixed on the data streaming in from the fleet's sensor arrays. Everything about this mission screamed danger. The Arcleans had never been known to let their operations go unprotected, and they would certainly be on high alert after the recent attack on their supply chain. Lydia had seen what they were capable of. Utter devastation, with surgical precision. And while the Federation had now trained in the brutal ways of the Deathworlders, she knew that nothing could truly prepare them for the storm that was about to unfold. "Commander, we're within range." Captain Cormac's voice broke through the tension, his calm demeanor betraying none of the anxiety that Lydia could feel in her gut. He was a seasoned officer, but even the most experienced veteran would be tested in a situation like this. Lydia's grip tightened on the edge of the console. The mission was clear: strike fast, hit hard, and cripple the Arclean supply network before they could react. But there was no foolproof plan. They had prepared for weeks, undergone brutal training under the Deathworlders, but war against the Arcleans was an unknown. There was no textbook for this kind of conflict. "Do we have eyes on the logistics hub?" Lydia asked, her voice firm even though her heart was pounding. "Multiple Arclite ships in orbit, 3 heavy warships, 2 frigates, and a dozen smaller vessels. They're on high alert, Commander. It looks like they've already begun mobilizing," Cormac replied, his fingers flying over the console as he ran a series of scans. "I'm detecting some sort of energy buildup, likely an anti-intrusion shield or early detection system." Lydia's mind worked quickly. "Cut our transmissions, no more comms. If we give them a chance to signal their fleet, it's all over. We're going in quiet." "Understood," Cormac said, turning to relay the order to the communications officer. Lydia's hand hovered over the holo-map of the system. She could see the energy signatures of the Arclean ships as they orbited the logistics hub. It would be nearly impossible to slip past them undetected, but they had trained for this. Stealth tactics learned from the Deathworlders. They had learned to hide in the vastness of space, use the environment to their advantage. It was time to test those skills. "Deploy the strike team," Lydia said, her voice carrying the weight of the decision. "Get them on the ground before the enemy has time to react." The strike team was composed of the Federation's most skilled soldiers, all of whom had been put through the grueling Deathworlder training. They had honed their combat skills, learned the art of survival in hostile environments, and were now prepared for a mission unlike any they had ever faced. The team's objective was to infiltrate the Arclean hub, sabotage their operations, and cripple their supply chains. Every second would count. If they failed, it would mean certain death. Lydia's thoughts raced as she watched the ships of the strike force launch from the Indomitable. They would have to infiltrate the hub quickly, silently, and most importantly, stay off the Arcleans' radar. With every ship and every soldier, the stakes grew higher. The fate of the Federation rested on their shoulders. The pressure was crushing, but there was no time to hesitate. "Commander, the strike team is away," Cormac reported. "They're on course to the surface." "Good. Now we wait." So close now. For hours, the crew aboard the Indomitable sat in tense silence, each of them waiting for a sign, a report from the ground forces. The time seemed to stretch on, each passing minute a weight on Lydia's shoulders. She knew that every second counted. The longer the strike team was on the surface, the more time the Arcleans had to react. And once they reacted, it would be impossible to keep the mission quiet. The battle would spiral out of control. Then, as if on cue, the first communication came through. A low, staticky message came from Lieutenant Darla Jenkins, the leader of the strike team. "Commander, we're in. The hub's security grid is down. We've successfully breached the perimeter, proceeding with sabotage operations now." Lydia breathed a sigh of relief. The team had made it past the toughest part, getting in undetected. But the hard part was still to come. Disabling the Arclean hub was no simple task. The team would have to plant explosives, disable their energy reactors, and take out the central command node, all while avoiding the Arclean forces that patrolled the station. "Status update, Lieutenant," Lydia pressed, her fingers drumming anxiously on the console. "We're making progress, Commander," Jenkins replied. "We've neutralized 2 patrols, and we've planted the charges on the main reactor. One more objective to go. Just keep the heat off us for a little longer." Lydia's heart was in her throat as she waited for more information. She glanced at the view screen, watching the Arclean ships in orbit, all still unaware of the strike force on the surface. But there was no telling how long they would remain oblivious. Then the calm was shattered. "Commander, they've detected us. The Arcleans are responding. They've activated the station's security systems. We've got hostile forces inbound." Lieutenant Jenkins' voice crackled through the comms, panic creeping into her words. Lydia's stomach dropped. "Hold your ground, Lieutenant. We can't afford to lose the team." The ship's sensors went wild as the Arclean ships began shifting, their energy levels spiking. They were aware of the Federation's presence now, and they were preparing to retaliate. The logistics hub was no longer a quiet target. It had turned into a battleground. "We've got incoming enemy fire," Cormac shouted from the helm. "The Arclean warships are locking onto us. They know we're here." "Brace for impact," Lydia shouted as alarms blared across the bridge. The Indomitable shuddered violently as enemy fire ripped into its shields. The powerful Arclean energy blasts hammered the ship, sending waves of shock through the hull. Lydia gritted her teeth, gripping the console as the ship rocked from side to side. "The shield's holding at 60%, Cormac reported, his voice strained. "But we can't take another hit like that." Lydia's mind was racing, every decision now critical. She couldn't afford to lose the Indomitable, and she couldn't afford to lose the strike team. Her fingers flew across the console, issuing orders to the fleet. "Return fire. All ships. Target their warships. Keep them off the Indomitable long enough for the strike team to complete their mission," Lydia barked. The Federation ships maneuvered into position, engaging the Arclean warships in a brutal firefight. Energy blasts lit up the void, filling the space around them with explosions and fiery death. The Indomitable swerved, narrowly avoiding an incoming missile, its guns opening fire in return. The Federation ships were outmatched in terms of firepower, but they had the element of surprise and the element of desperation. On the surface of the Arclean hub, the strike team fought with everything they had. Jenkins' team was pinned down by incoming enemy troops. The sound of gunfire echoed through the comms as the battle raged on. The clock was ticking. The explosives had been planted, but they needed to make it to the extraction point. The Arcleans were closing in fast. "Commander, we need cover. They're overwhelming us." Jenkins' voice was strained, desperate. Lydia clenched her fists. "Hold on, Lieutenant. We're coming in hot." Her heart pounded in her chest as the Indomitable shifted into a dangerous new position, angling for a better line of fire. The battle was escalating, but they had no choice but to press forward. "Launch all available fighters," Lydia ordered. "We need to clear a path for the extraction team." The fighter pilots, newly trained under the brutal teachings of the Deathworlders, soared out of the hangar bays, their sleek ships darting toward the surface in a dazzling display of precision. Their task was simple: protect the strike team at all costs. "Commander, the hub's reactor's going critical. We've planted the last charge. We're getting out, but it's going to blow." Jenkins' voice crackled with urgency. Lydia's eyes widened. "Evacuate now. Get out of there, all of you." The fight for the hub was chaotic, a mad scramble to finish the mission and get out before the entire station went up in flames. Lydia's mind was a whirl of commands, every moment critical. And then a triumphant shout came over the comms. "Mission complete. We're clear. Get us out of here." Good work, Lieutenant. All ships full retreat. Get us out of here now. The Indomitable and its fleet turned, heading for the nearest jump point, their engines firing to full power. Behind them, the logistics hub erupted in a cataclysmic explosion, sending shock waves through the system. The Arclean ships in orbit were battered by the blast, but their retaliatory fire ceased as the Federation fleet made its escape. Lydia leaned back in her chair, breathing deeply. The strike had been successful, but at what cost? The war had only just begun, and they had made their first move. The Arcleans would not take this lightly. This was far from over. "Commander," Cormac said, breaking her thoughts, "we've done it. But they'll come for us now. The Arcleans won't let this stand." Lydia's gaze hardened. "Then we'll be ready for them." The Federation had struck a blow, but the Arcleans would come, and next time they would not be caught off guard. The war had only just begun.